this is good that we narrow this down here. These are kids that are outside of the hierarchy. They're outside of the normal social hierarchy. They're not even included inside of it. They're mostly males. They're humiliated in one way or another, detached, and they have issues with connection. So, but for the purpose of this podcast, we're sort of concentrating on highlighting that there's a particular thing that happens when you combine humiliation and maleness. There seems to be a certain little extra spark to it. It matters deep down in these kids, deep down in the Homo sapien reality. There not only does I would say the passing their genes on through procreation piece, which is deep down prodding at them, but also if you're a male and you're not even a part of the village, you're fucked.
You don't care about that village. You can go in and destroy it. It might make you feel better. And if you're not a part of it, you're going to get eaten by lions anyway. So you might as well go in and make a splash. And I'll tell you what, I think the spark you're talking about, I think it's easily explained from, again, we're just going to go to bioevolution again. Two things. If I'm humiliated and I'm dehumanized by my competition, my male competition, I'm less likely to breed. So from the most simplistic perspective is that I'm less likely to get a mate. That humiliation, that little slight, that tiny little thing that you said has so much greater meaning because she or they over there see me as less than desirable because you just made me look that way. So it just got amplified, and that's a legitimate feeling in everyone to be humiliated, but especially young males. Now, the second thing is any kind of humiliating statement, any kind of takedown is a step toward dehumanizing someone, which is a step toward attacking them physically. So historically, before we had police and armies, we took care of our own security. We cared for ourselves and our family. We defended our own house and our own neighborhoods, right? We haven't had organized police except for the last couple hundred years. Rome didn't even have police, right? It's an organized city. They wouldn't even let the army in there. You had captains, capos that hung out in neighborhoods and were kind of the justice. But if somebody says something to you as a male that is offensive to you or makes you look powerless, historically, they're making it easier for them to attack you. So being reactively defensive and and exaggerating that is an important feature to saying, you better stop now because I know where you're headed. When you just called me this, that means the next step is to call me that, and the next step is to try to kill me. Take my stuff, take my family, take my spouse. That's 200,000 years of existence. Now we have people protect us. We have lockable homes. We have social systems in place, and we're not supposed to be offended by words that humiliate us. And I'm not talking about offended. We're not supposed to be enraged. We're supposed to control that anger. Yet you felt it and I felt it. Even probably within the last couple months of our life, somebody said something, did something where we kind of felt ourselves go, motherfucker. And then you turn red and your ears get red and you're ready to fight inside. But here comes the cognitive overlay of society. Oh, okay. We're going to calm that down. And it's safer for people to say that shit to you now because you're not allowed to fight. You can't challenge them out to the duel field. Like, let's get sword and knives and guns and go out and settle this. You don't get to do that anymore. So now people are like, well, we can say anything and you have to buck it up. You have to absolutely handle this in a mature way. That's hard to do because we're just a few hundred years into enlightenment. But I think from an evolutionary perspective, humiliating somebody is about one of the worst things you can do to them. And you put yourself at tremendous risk because you're igniting a very primitive response, which is you're threatening their ability to procreate and you're threatening them and everything they have in their family, or it would be perceived that way because you're dehumanizing them.
What is going on, everyone? Tis Miyanovich, and I welcome you to the main dojo, the place where we process the raw struggles of men in an unprecedented paradigm. There is something inside of you that wants you to be more than what you are. But there also may be something inside of you that wants you to go down. And for some of us, that means going down for good. So, remove your ego, drop your bullshit, become vulnerable, and step into the dojo, mate. So there's one thing that I want to talk about here as we're getting to our last 40 minutes or half an hour. It might take this long. I don't know. This particular area of focus that you are an expert in, that I have been sucked into your tractor beam and pulled into your world. This is the area of threat assessment, behavioral threat assessment, student threat assessment, and school security. And this is how we know one another. And we are talking about men's issues today, or male issues today. So there is something that is happening inside of adolescent men, boys, rather, males, that they are troubled and challenged inside of the school environment, inside of the social environment, the social game, and inside of the social sexual game. And it's an obvious feature to me after reviewing so many cases that these boys are ending up taking the confusion and the pain of a situation that other boys are in worldwide, and they are translating it in a way that pushes them to end up trying to kill a single person or multiple people inside of their school. So these boys are in the same situation for the most part that most all others are in, and it's getting translated into the script of a mass shooting. So, and there's a part of this that's universal probably, but I think there's an aspect of this that has to do with maleness also, and that's a contributing factor in just these specific cases. What in the fuck is happening inside of these boys? And I know you'll have to talk about scientifically and psychologically and sort of the universal scheme, but I'd like for you today to talk about that with an accentuation on the fact that these are almost all boys, and sex or lack of sex or lack of sexual validation seems to be, or lack of social sexual validation seems to be a major player for a lot of these dudes. What is happening?
More and more, for sure. The incel movement is often brought up in discussions like this. Involuntary celibates, their anger at women for what they perceive as rejection, and then at the root of that is their lack of value, or what they see as a lack of value, because they aren't valuable to the opposite sex and the people they want to be valuable to. So we'll talk about humiliation in a minute, because I think that's at the root of it. But I also want to just say, I think the latest data is it may be higher than 17 now, but it was about 17% of rampage shooters. So again, we want to be accurate about what we are saying when we say school shooting. We're talking about rampage shootings. We're talking about acts, kids screaming their angst to violent acts. This isn't a gang hit. This isn't a fight that turns into a weapon assault. Those are terrible. We're talking about what people think of with Columbine. And there are media sources that would make us believe there have been thousands of those. There have not, as you know, now 90 something, I think, since 92. It's about 17% of those have been female, and I know of 3 situations where the assailant was a trans student or a non-binary student. So we have seen the introduction of 2 other genders other than males, but the motivation and the cause of that, or the motivation, and is very similar for the 17%, that they experience the same kinds of things, and they did something that we're seeing more and more commonly. They have appropriated someone else's angst and anger. Yeah. So the most recent version of that, that is a blaring version for me, is the shooting of the CEO, medical insurance CEO, and I don't use names, by the way, you know that, and by the assailant, who at that age, while probably experiencing some frustration from the medical industry, has no idea of what other people have gone through by the time they get to be 50. And the only way for that person to truly have conducted that act as a hero would have been to appropriate that from other people who have experienced it. Otherwise, he's just a different version of a mass shooter with one target. And he probably had more targets, as we know. He was probably planning on doing more. So I'm going to express myself in my rage from wherever it comes. And this apparently is the culturally cool way to do it, because I can get my face on Time magazine, look at how infamous the Columbiners are. They are an institution now of America. The Columbine is a verb, adverb, adjective, and a noun. You Columbine something, the Columbiners. And where I think this comes from, ultimately at its root, for the vast majority of these situations, is humiliation and feeling left out for some reason. It's not bullying per se. Bullying magnifies it. It absolutely magnifies it. But the Columbine shooters were actually not particularly bullied. They were bullies, but they felt excluded. Now, one of them was probably easily diagnosed as a psychopath in hindsight. And psychopathy, for no other reason than just to do it, could be a cause of this. That I think of the Las Vegas shooter when I think of somebody who was likely a psychopath and hit it well and basically conducted that shooting as a masterpiece killing. When his life was falling apart, he couldn't fly his airplane and his funds were depleting. But overall, did he have the rage and angst and rejection? Likely not. He was a successful individual, a gambler, respected. But the vast majority of these cases are kids that have been humiliated, and they see a template they can follow where someone else raged with weapons and became infamous for 15 minutes. It's 15 minutes of fame they're never going to get anywhere else. And these are often kids that don't see a future for themselves. They are emasculated, whether they're girls, boys, or trans, because this is a masculine type of rejection. Power, belonging, I want to be important. Not that girls don't have those needs, but not at the same kind of level as a young testosterone filled male. So these 17% of these shootings that were female had dynamics similar to that. They'd been left out, or they appropriated the angst and rage of another person, and that fueled their fire. But this is the one message I try to give educators and cops. Please, please, please don't humiliate these kids. Don't. Remember back when you were 15, 14, and you were embarrassed by something? The level of humiliation and embarrassment at 15 was a day wrecker. It was a life wrecker. And a life to you was a week. Now, we're older. We don't like to be humiliated. Absolutely not, or embarrassed. But we've learned how to laugh at ourselves and get past it, and then hate that person who did that in secret, that motherfucker who made fun of me and embarrassed me in front of all the chicks at the bar, right? Okay, but we've grown up. Now you got a 15-year-old kid, and he doesn't have those skills. He hasn't learned to laugh at himself. And People are making fun of him. They're emasculating him. I'm just using that term kind of loosely. And he doesn't ever see that there's a route to being popular or even accepted. So really, if you look at the more pop culture writers of school shooting, and you replace the word bullying with rejection, because really bullying isn't present in all of these cases, maybe slightly more than a majority of them, but really it's about rejection and humiliation and a sense of having no direction in your life. And then combine that with a cultural script, 2 cultural scripts: vigilantism, which, hey, is about as popular as anything could possibly be popular today. And it was pretty popular in the 60s with spaghetti westerns and Dirty Harry movies, right? American vigilantism is a real thing. And think about the movies, the films that make the most money. They're blockbuster Marvel hits, DC Comics, filled with vigilantes, right? So you got a sense of vigilantism. I'm going to take justice in my own hands, and I'm going to deliver it because no one else is. And you combine that with the cultural script that was set really kind of in stone by Columbine. And Columbine followed a vigilante script. But now the cultural script is school shooting, mass shooting, kill a bunch of people, make your statement, go out in a flame of glory. And that is extraordinarily present in today's youth. There aren't any kids capable of, reasonable cognition that don't know what a school shooting is and haven't thought about a couple kids in their class where they've thought, we probably should lay off that kid, right? That's something I didn't worry about. We didn't have any of that growing up at all. We laid off that kid just because at some point he's going to turn around and throw that punch. And sometimes I was that kid, but I really think it has to do with belonging. That's why the title of one of my books is about inclusion and connection. It's not to be contemporary and try to be with the latest pop words. I honestly believe that, and I got into the business in the 80s for that reason, because fresh out of high school and then into college, I looked back at my days in college or high school, and I thought about all the shitty things I did and said. And I was not a perpetrator of, by any means, the worst of it. And I thought about some of those kids that were, the targets of that, or just weren't included, man. Like they weren't cool. So they weren't included even in kind of the, here's the social pyramid of my high school. And I'm right about here. These are kids they're kids outside of the pyramid even. And, they're not included. They're easily humiliated. They're embarrassed and they hate themselves, whether it's body issues or whatever it is. I look back on that, man, if I'm going to do anything in education, it'll be to try to change some of that and deal with the results of it, which is violent, angry youth, young men in particular, because again, we have the testosterone and we have the muscle mass, and that has been given to us by Mother Nature. Like it or not, we're the violent gender. We are by far the most, 9 out of 10 violent crimes are committed by males. And if you really want if you want the thing that correlates best with violence, the easiest thing to do is just check for testosterone. So testosterone and violent behavior, greatest predictor, which unfortunately is about half the population.
Yeah. So, what's interesting is that, although it seems quite oversimplified for me to say this, you don't really, in the population of rampage shooters at the school, not only do you not see captains of the football team doing it, which would be easily predictable because you're like, well, they're going to be super popular, in shape, they're getting laid like a motherfucker, like, right, everything's satisfactory for the most part. They might not be happy deep down for some reasons, but in terms of the social game, they're good. They're seen as somebody with value. But maybe you might think, well then all the nerds are going to be the ones that would want to do the rampage shooting. But then when you go to the nerds, you have nerds that are like the head of the Glee Club. Right. They're fine.
Robotics, you got it all. Yeah.
They're fucking great. They're not, they might get slammed into the locker by the captain of the whatevers, but they have meaning. They get laid. They're or hand jobs or whatever, they're like good also. Yeah. It's only this certain subpopulation of really outsiders.
It's outside that social pyramid. Because what we were calling the nerdy kids growing up, they were in the pyramid. They were in the pyramid. They had friends. And here's the bottom line. They had something called inhibitors and protective factors. So that captain of the football team has a lot of protective factors or inhibitors. Inhibitors mean they inhibit acting out. So he wants to keep his grades up. He doesn't want to get in trouble. He likes playing football. He's popular. He's important. All of those things inhibit misbehavior, and they are protective factors. The kid in the robotics group, he's got robotics. He's celebrated for his ability to put a robot together. All those little things add up to these protective factors and inhibitors. Kid playing music. Even at the bottom end of this social pyramid, you still have kids within groups connected. And it might be that their only connection in the school is one adult, which we know from the research is one of the greatest protective factors, is a pro-social adult in a kid's life other than a parent. And if that's all that kid has in the social pyramid, they're still in the pyramid because they get to go talk to the math teacher after school and geek out on algebra. Whatever that is, the kid is still connected. It's the kids that are outside of that pyramid over here. And they're disenfranchised and they have no reason to want to be or invest in the institution of education. They don't like their teachers. Their teachers don't even know who they are. They don't have friends. They've been rejected from all the cliques. They're not good at or don't try sports, robotics, debate, or music. And they're bored. They don't have anything to do. And what they end up doing is spending too much time on these other topics: nihilism, disenfranchisement, anger, resentment. And then they look for role models who have solved those problems. And now we have them. We used to have them kind of in myth, but now we have them. There are role models. They are mass shooters, school shooters. And you don't have to go to encyclopedia or the library to learn about them. You simply open your phone. And one Google search will take you to the Columbine Club or any other chat room, or subgroup that's discussing why today's, school shooters are messiahs, incels that, get revenge on women. And Randy, I don't know if you know this, but there are more and more people thinking there's really a real misogynistic tone to a lot of these shootings that we didn't realize when they happened. But now that we have more information, we're learning more about some of these shooters and how much they did resent girls. And their targets were primarily girls or selectively girls. Certainly Santa Barbara is like, the big example, but there's a lot more to the Santa Barbara than just an incel gone mad. I think you'll probably hear about that in the future. There's some good work being done around understanding that particular shooting case. And someone maybe I think that would be great for one of your podcasts is Elliot's mother. She does a lot of speaking tours and she's a lovely person who is doing amazing things to try to keep this from happening again. And she's not doing it to grandstand or be in front of a microphone or be heroic. When you meet her and you talk to her, she's the real thing. She's very genuine and has lived one of the most terrible tragedies because her son did this and also died. And so, it's like the worst double whammy you can experience. A thought anyway that you might think.
No, I saw her speak at the VTAC.
Yeah.
And I just, she opened up a lot that time and was raw, and it was not the time for me to approach her.
Yeah.
So, but that is definitely something I might take you up on if you have her contact information.
I can get it, yeah.
I would definitely love to have her on for both the LGO just as one, and I would publish it to two different places because her courage to stand up there and fucking do that. I'll tell you as an aside, there are very few things that drive me into like seeing red, but it happens. And that day I got on the edge of seeing red because as she's up in front of hundreds, opening up her veins
Yeah.
to us in the worst, with courage off the charts, opening up the story about her son being one of the most famous mass shooters. God, and it was almost entirely men. And so this is a men's podcast, so we can fucking talk about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
How many of those men in that audience were staring into their fucking phones?
I saw the same thing when I watched her speak. Yeah.
I fucking wanted to Hulk out so bad. It was so fucking bad. I was like, what? Are these actually even men?
I even saw a few of them dissing her, the side gun, because I'm in the audience and I'm hearing the vast majority of people being amazed, but some not paying attention or caring, but then even a few like, she shouldn't even be up there. I mean, it was her son that did it. Why are we celebrating her poor parenting? And that's why I said there are just so many layers to this story. And her being a poor parent was not one of them. She was a loving, caring mom who, man, when you hear the full story, which eventually you will, you already got some of it. She's a better parent than most of us.
They were doing so fucking much for that kid.
Yeah.
It was like that kid was the opposite of being neglected,
Yep.
the opposite of having opportunities, the opposite of having, multiple fucking layers of therapy. If there was bad parenting there, I'll just say for right now, it wasn't happening from her.
No, and she even, she did everything she could up to the day to alert authorities about her concerns. So, but we want to talk about some toxic masculinity. The people that were that I saw making the side comments were men, and they were most of them, all of them
cops.
were particular.
All of them were cops. I'll say
yeah, and I kind of like, this is why people don't like you guys. You're really, you screw it up for the cops that go out of their way to do community policing and connect and be kind and, try to engage in respectful interaction. It takes one of these other assholes and they can just ruin it. Because I walked away going, fuck, more than any other industry, I see that attitude within law enforcement. It's sad. Why is that? I don't know. Does it attract it or does it breed it? Of course, my experiences with law enforcement have been with people who were pro-social, wanting to move forward progressively to eliminate violence. And they wanted to be on behavioral threat assessment teams, which are prevention teams using connection and inclusion. And so I've been exposed to I think the best of the best. But occasionally I see something like that, or I'm in a conversation and I hear it and I'm kind of like, oh man. Gross.
Yeah. So you have experience with cops with brains.
Yeah,
and
brains
maturity.
and hearts and actual guts. They are braver cops because they don't rely on this kind of reactionary anger to drive them for their law and order perspective. They actually understand law and order, the rule of law and justice, and how you convince the population to be law-abiding citizens when there's a fair number of people that will try to get away with shit, right? And hammering them over the head just drives them into the shadows. Building relationships and connecting with them brings them out and gives them alternatives. And that's where I've seen before the defund movement, I saw such a progression in our own police departments here in Salem of that kind of thinking. I was just so impressed by the 30 years that I watched policing really kind of become more humanistic in a way, without sounding like a weenie when I say that. But it did. And I think it's possible that the defund movement pushed a reaction into law enforcement. They're having trouble recruiting. And I know that it's a shit job. And so you get a lot of police officers just still kind of angry about that. I hope we can get past it.
It's another one of these instances where, on the left, hearts are in the right place, but so impassioned that so I talked about this, a number of times, like the combination of high intelligence and retardation at the same time, the combination of like high passion and retardation at the same time.
Yeah.
Like we simply can't afford those kinds of things. And this is probably another one of these instances where people are trying to do right, but on the left, we end up shooting ourselves in the foot. The other one would be, we've talked about this before, where there's such hyper focus over, is there equity going on in threat assessment systems, that they're disallowing threat assessment systems in schools because the hyper focus on equity is there. I know you've made sure that your system overemphasizes it and has multiple checks and balances for such a thing. But there are instances where you can't get viable threat assessment into a school because they're worried that it's going to be applied to black students more
inequitably.
Yes, right.
And the data is not supporting that idea at all. And there's plenty of data for the Virginia model. There's new data for the Salem-Kaiser model that shows it does not target any particular group. And more data coming. That was done by the University of Washington. I forgot to send you that article. I'm sorry. It's just got published in the Journal of School Psychology. A study on the Cascade model shows, again, we've had this data for a long time. We just didn't publish it, but that we don't target any particular group at all. It's circumstance driven, and it's not that equity doesn't play a role, but we're looking at risk factors for somebody who's going to bring a gun to school and kill some people. And here's the thing. Every group, every human has that capacity if given the motive, right? To be violent. So we move quickly with it. The other thing the research is really showing with the SK model, I don't think there's any Virginia or, CSTAG model research that supports that, probably because they haven't done it, but that our interventions are not punitive. We're not punishment driven. We're intervention driven and connection driven. Punitive and punishment interventions tend to alienate that population that is most vulnerable to this idea. You can punish 95% of the kids and say, you're on restriction, no more, you're doing chores for 5 weeks till your grades are, and they will respond to that. Now, I'm not saying that's the best way to motivate your kids, but they're going to respond to that and probably do their homework and not go kill a bunch of people in school. But there's about a tiny segment of 1% of the population, maybe up to 5% of the population of youth, that do not respond to punitive interventions. They do that. They have one more reason to hate you. They don't even want to be there in the first place. And now you've just proven to them that you're an asshole and given them another reason to want to be angry and hurt you. And so purposefully, since this system that I was part of designing is looking for those kids that would hurt people and trying to stop them, the way we stop them is to connect, give them meaning, and remove the humiliation from their life. And it works. And it's because we know that if we say, well, you're kicked out of school, got that. Now I got a lot more time on my hands to practice on my simulated death games at home and get some weapons and target shoot. And guess what? You don't know where I am now. I used to know that I was in school, and now you don't even know where I am. And you're still my target. And I know when the bell schedule happens and that door over by the gym opens at 7:45 for 15 minutes electronically. And I can walk right in because you don't post sentries around your school looking for me. You got 2 security people wandering the hallways at the beginning of school with their hands full. This is an easy plan. And that, what I just described, is slightly less than half the school shootings that were done by kids that were kicked out, expelled, or suspended.
This is good that we narrow this down here. These are kids that are outside of the hierarchy. They're outside of the normal social hierarchy. They're not even included inside of it. They're mostly males. They're humiliated in one way or another, detached, and they have issues with connection. So, but for the purpose of this podcast, we're sort of concentrating on highlighting that there's a particular thing that happens when you combine humiliation and maleness. There seems to be a certain little extra spark to it. It matters deep down in these kids, deep down in the Homo sapien reality. There not only does the passing their genes on through procreation piece, which is deep down prodding at them, but also if you're a male and you're not even a part of the village, you're fucked.
You don't care about that village. You can go in and destroy it. It might make you feel better. And if you're not a part of it, you're going to get eaten by lions anyway. So you might as well go in and make a splash. And I'll tell you what, I think the spark you're talking about It's actually, I think it's easily explained from, again, we're just going to go to bioevolution again. Two things. If I'm humiliated and I'm dehumanized by my competition, my male competition, I'm less likely to breed. So from the most simplistic perspective is that I'm less likely to get a mate. That humiliation, that little slight, that tiny little thing that you said has so much greater meaning because she or they over there see me as less than desirable because you just made me look that way. So it just got amplified, and that's a legitimate feeling in everyone to be humiliated, but especially young males. Now, the second thing is any kind of humiliating statement, any kind of takedown is a step toward dehumanizing someone, which is a step toward attacking them physically. So historically, before we had police and armies, we took care of our own security. We cared for ourselves and our family. We defended our own house and our own neighborhoods, right? We haven't had organized police except for the last couple hundred years. Rome didn't even have police, right? It's an organized city. They wouldn't even let the army in there. You had captains, capos that hung out in neighborhoods and were kind of the justice. But if somebody says something to you as a male that is offensive to you or makes you look powerless, historically, they're making it easier for them to attack you. So being reactively defensive and and exaggerating that is an important feature to saying, you better stop now because I know where you're headed. When you just called me this, that means the next step is to call me that. And the next step is to try to kill me. Take my stuff, take my family, take my spouse. That's 200,000 years of existence. Now we have people protect us. We have lockable homes. We have social systems in place, and we're not supposed to be offended by words that humiliate us. And I'm talking about offended. We're not supposed to be enraged. We're supposed to control that anger. Yet you felt it and I've felt it. Even probably within the last couple months of our life, somebody said something, did something where we kind of felt ourselves go, motherfucker. And then you turn red and your ears get red and you're ready to fight inside. But here comes the cognitive overlay of society. Oh, okay. We're going to calm that down. And it's safer for people to say that shit to you now because you're not allowed to fight. You can't challenge them out to the duel field. Like, let's get sword and knives and guns and go out and settle this. You don't get to do that anymore. So now people are like, well, we can say anything and you have to buck it up. You have to absolutely handle this in a mature way. That's hard to do because we're just a few hundred years into enlightenment. But I think from an evolutionary perspective, humiliating somebody is about one of the worst things you can do to them. And you put yourself at tremendous risk because you're igniting a very primitive response, which is you're threatening their ability to procreate and you're threatening them and everything they have in their family, or it would be perceived that way because you're dehumanizing them.
We just have a couple minutes. So my thought is that if we took those two elements that you're talking about, if you simplified it all the way back down to the bioevolutionary thing, yes, we know all these other things are combined. There's a script, right, that they can follow. But then my thought moved to what might be the third most important thing, which is their inability to come off of it psychologically. So my observation is with human thinking, even when you have dangerous and shitty thoughts, murderous thoughts, dark thoughts, they decay. They just kind of decay, most of them. Some of them, perhaps you start to generate your own obsession with them, but the priorities in your life just force the situation and you don't even need therapy, but these fucking whacked out thoughts just decay, maybe after a week. these kids, this thought is not decaying. These thoughts are not decaying. So there's a combination as the third thing that I would look at. There's the two evolutionary things that you bring up, bioevolutionary. The third thing I would look at is the inability of those specific individuals to stop the obsession or the looping. They just have a particular weakness towards that. And then we have what we talked about in the beginning, where you have this goddamn technology that's reaching out of the screen and pulling your face into it.
Yeah.
So perhaps we're not seeing, this is only 20 years now, really. We're really looking at the rampage, the school shooter, for 25 years, really. We've never had it before. And isn't it interesting that we have it now and we have these goddamn machines?
Yeah.
At the same time.
Confirm the loop, I think, because you said something important, because other priorities kind of require that the thoughts dissipate. Well, a lot of these kids don't have other priorities, so they're in the loop anyway because they don't have anything else to think about. And the best example to use is suicidal thinking, which is far more common and certainly is a part of almost every adolescent's thought process. So I'll just kill myself. Life is miserable. But shit, I got a rehearsal coming up and I really like to play the piano. Or I still like to play basketball. I have those protective factors that move me past that thinking, which again, developmentally is human, to question your own existence and wonder if it's all worth it, right? But if you're stuck in the suicidal loop, this is one of the things we look at in suicide risk assessments, is, are they stuck in that loop? No, okay, yeah, they've thought about it. Okay, I'm not worried yet. But if they have a plan and they've handled the gun and they've touched the medication and they keep looping back, they're getting the buzz of the solution and they don't have anything else to think about. So each time they loop back, they get more serious about thinking about it. They find out how many pills to take. They load the gun and they get that rush. The endorphins kick in. I got a solution and I feel good for a while and then it goes away. They don't have the other priorities to break them out of that. And those are your kids that are really high risk for suicide. Same thing with kids that want to shoot and hurt people, is they're in the loop that this is a solution. They've appropriated someone else's anger, combined it with themselves. They don't feel alone anymore because they're part of a group of people that have done that. And that is their loop. They don't have the other things to break them out of that. In other words, they're not busy. But what did grandpa and grandma used to say? Idle hands, something, right? You stay busy. If you're busy doing stuff, you're less likely to get in trouble, think about things that are depressing. You're less likely to be depressed. Bottom line, that holds up in the data as well. Stay busy, stay focused, stay positive, and you'll be on the more happier end of the continuum. You certainly find satisfaction in life. And while you might have ideas about self-destruction or hurting people that have pissed you off, they're fleeting. They come and go. And, as having kind of a bummer mood will come and go. But I think it comes down to those priorities you just mentioned. Those are kids. So some of those kids have some neurological stuff. Some of those kids have had abuse. Some of those kids come from perfect families. But what all of those kids haven't had is the protective factors and the inhibitors in their life. Even the ones from great families, they've lost those. So I'm talking about Columbine, where I said one of those kids is likely a psychopath and really kind of appears to have been in it for the rush. And the other kid was a depressed, suicidal, troubled kid. His mother was terribly worried about him, couldn't connect with him. I self-isolated in all of her great efforts to be a good mom. She couldn't reach him. And he didn't have anything going on in his life, and this was his solution. This was what he was going to do, and he did it. So again, the intervention side of that is find the hook, one hook. What's going to get this kid thinking forward? Or it goes for adults as well, because we do adult threat assessment at the same time. And the cognitive override for all of this is just, honest to God, needs to be taught in school, is reason. Just don't do it anymore, man. They tell kids to follow their heart. And yeah, it's important to listen to your heart. Your heart is fickle, though. Your heart is very fickle. Follow your guts. Your guts won't ever let you down. Poison is poison. But at the end of the day, use your brain, use your ability to reason to check every emotion like you would check the engine of a used car before you bought it. You'd kick the tires and you'd look at that engine and you would say, is this good? And emotions, you got to do that. That's where people with passion who follow their heart, I find to be greater risks, especially in this world of security, because they are so impassioned, they lose that reason. They don't know how to self-check. And I honestly think that, and I do know that there are private schools that have gone back to this kind of more classic kind of education where they talk about reason, the road to reason and logic, and the importance of feeling and emotion and social engagement, but also the importance of being smart and thinking about those things before you act on them. And the Stoics said it best when they said, you cannot avoid an emergent feeling, anger, fear. You are hardwired to feel that. But what you can control is what that does to the next 20 minutes, 2 days, and 10 years of your life. And they use the word assent. You can choose not to assent to that anger, to that self-pity. Somebody may be trying to offend you. You don't have to be offended by that. You might initially go, but then you can say, okay, this really doesn't have anything. I'm not going to subjectify this situation. I'm not going to let this define me. Now that takes an entire lifetime to learn that kind of discipline, that we could start kids at an earlier date. And the most successful counselors in school, psychs, social workers in school that I see use that model. It's the cognitive behavioral model. And they use that to help kids get past the jealousy and the cliques and the humiliation, because all that stuff is real. But the way to get past it, right, is to not personalize it and move on. And young people don't know how to do that. They have to be taught.
Needed more now than ever. The return to reason.
And every step of the way, social media is pulling the carpet out from underneath it.
It is fucking awful. It's fucking awful. I find it interesting that in what you just said there, you brought up, the need for staying active, the need for having things, the idle hand things, the idle hands thing, because that's where we started off talking about, where you were like, I thought I was going to retire and I'm going to be fucking chilling. And then I can't do it, man. I got to stay. And if I don't stay moving and grooving and doing stuff, I'm going to be in jail. I'm going to be fucked up. It's the same dynamic that we're talking about here. So what's the conclusion? Males need to groove. They need to move. They need to have stuff to do. They need to connect and belong. If they don't have that stuff, they're in fucking trouble.
They are. Depression goes up. And our society doesn't celebrate our elderly like other societies do. So we don't elevate our elderly to places of wisdom unless they happen to be the alphas that are, like I said, the older men who still have, who are still moving forward and are affluent, still are seen as wise. But there are the rest of the men that are retired, they lose that status. And I'm not saying that they should have to have a status, but it's important to their psyche to be seen as having accomplished something and celebrated in some way, whether it's by their family or their community. And we generally don't do that as much. We do it, but we don't do it as much as some other cultures where we see that elderly population as a treasure, instead of just a bunch of old people we got to take care of while they play shuffleboard.
We're at 2. I want to stop. I'll end it with just this last thing. I think this is an important distinction to make because we've covered these things during this talk today, is that you brought up your brother and he's older and he's like a perpetual adolescent and it fucking harms the situation. So he's an older person and he's still an adolescent. That is different from when you and I are sending each other dick memes all day. That's a different thing. These are 2 different things.
Let's be clear. We're stepping out of adulthood into adolescenthood to send the dick memes. But we go back to work, man. We get back in there. We take care of our families and our business.
Correct.
And then we stop around 10 o'clock and hit another meme real quick.
Sure. It's 2 separate things. We are not that thing we're talking about. Perpetual adolescence. there's midget jokes and dick memes. That is not us. We do it, but we have a basis of being fucking adults. We know we're doing it and we come back. Some people just cannot fucking grow up.
They're stuck in the dick meme. We at least can get out of the dick
their
meme.
whole life is a midget and a dick meme.
Yes.
So I think about that often when I'm like in the liberal gun owners community and I have to be like, I have to step up and be the chief and start talking to people about squaring up, fucking discipline. What the fuck are you doing? And then I think there's probably an issue here with my leadership because these dudes mostly are just seeing me throw fucking midget dick memes all day. And then now I'm like, grow up. It's like, this is probably a really bad mixed signal.
Time to be serious, man. Time to be serious. I'm serious. We got to get serious.
Yeah, no, and 95% of my communications are fucking dick memes. It's not the best combination, but we are adults. I just want to make sure everybody knows.